talking about the world's first waterproof watch, and we have the best guest to share and to share his knowledge in the area about this topic. So Stan spent multiple years researching this topic. Which one was the world's first waterproof watch? He wrote a book about it. So Stan, welcome. I'm very glad you were able to join us.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. I'm glad to be here with you today.
Thank you, Stan. So I want to start with something that I saw on Rolex.com. So if you go to Rolex, you go to the history section. So I see that this is actually official Rolex website.
Oh,
And
I know exactly what you're
that's
going to be referring to.
that's the official Rolex message in today. That's not like something from the past. That's today. So
Yes.
it says this: 1926. The first waterproof watch in 1926, the creation of Rolex of the first waterproof and dustproof wristwatch marked a major step forward, given the name Oyster and so on. So I think that this would be a good start for us.
Yes, that is quite a story. Hans Wilsdorf whipped up there, because there is absolute guaranteed evidence now that I've discovered in the United States National Archives that completely and utterly contradicts Hans Wilsdorf's claims and the origin story of the world's first waterproof wristwatch. That is just not how history actually happened. The vast majority of the writers in the wristwatch industry and Rolex themselves tout this erroneous claim in countless articles. You know, firsts in horological history, the history of the dive watch. They always cite the 26 Oyster, but nobody ever wants to talk about, the 1918 Waltham Depollier Field and Marine waterproof wristwatch. I don't know why. Maybe they just want to romanticize the story that, Rolex did this in 26 and they're still around today. But the story goes back much further than 1926.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it started with Charles Depollier. In 1915, he applied for his very first waterproof crown patent. A friend of his came over from Charles's hometown in Switzerland, right outside of Geneva. And forgive me if I mispronounce his name, from Lelac, Switzerland. I believe the gentleman's name was Augustus Jacques. And he came over to the United States from Lelac in 1950. And he and Charles Depollier came up with a patent drawings, and the patent application was granted in 1916 for a lockdown waterproof crown.
But it was applied in 15. So they actually applied it even earlier before it was granted.
The application was filed in 1915, and then it was granted in 1916. And that was his first one. From the House of Depollier, there were actually 4 more waterproof crown designs coming from their R&D department. I mean, there were literally 4 different men working on 4 different waterproof crown designs at the exact same time in Depollier's Altier. They were Mortimer Golden, Dunham, Tuff, and Charles Depollier himself. All of these patents were applied for. They were all granted. But it goes back even a little bit earlier, because there are obviously other parts of the watch case that you need to make watertight. On September 11th, 1917, Charles Depollier received a patent for his double clinched bezel. This was far from anything else anybody had ever done before. A double clinched bezel, basically, it grabs the crystal, a special Depollier crystal, from the top and from the bottom. It locks the crystal on both sides, and that technology started to appear in mid 1917. Because back during this time, nobody waited for their patent applications to be granted. As soon as
Mm-hmm.
they filed the patent application,
Mm-hmm.
more often than not, this technology would start being produced and sold
Mm-hmm.
before patents were even granted. That was
Mm-hmm.
very commonplace during this time period.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the
Yeah.
very first
Mm-hmm.
Depollier waterproof watch advertisement for the Field and Marine appeared on July 31st, 1918, in a
Mm-hmm.
magazine called The Keystone.
Mm-hmm.
Keystone was basically a watch and jewelry trade publication.
Mm-hmm.
There was also another big one called the Jeweler's Circular Weekly.
Mm-hmm.
That was the other. So basically, there were two trade publications for watches and jewelry, and those advertisements appeared on July 31st, 1918, and then the other one appeared on the next day in the other
Mm-hmm.
magazine on August 1st of 1918. Um,
And
uh,
you have this in your book. You have these advertisements in your book. I assume.
oh yeah, oh yeah, every one of them, every one of them. I mean,
Uh-huh.
and this was I believe Rolex touts their claim to fame on what is it, July of 1926, when Wilsdorf bought the patent from Perret, I believe it's Pergot.
Yeah. So see here, they don't even say that they bought a patent. They say like, "Hey, we invented it."
Yeah, yeah. Well, Hans Wilsdorf liked to get out his checkbook. Um, I don't believe he developed anything. I mean,
Yeah.
he was more of a businessman. He
Yes.
was the bagman, the money man, with a vision to
Mm-hmm.
create a great watch company, and I'll grant him he did. But some of the details of how this all happened in history aren't exactly accurate from his point of view.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because a lot of innovation in the movement area. So he claims like we invented this, we invented that, but actually they did not make their own movements. The Agler was making movements for them, and Agler. So in the early times, Agler was making movements not just for them; they were making movements for Gru and stuff like that. And he
Mhm.
was just like as you said, he was just like writing checks.
Yeah, I mean, he was a businessman. He didn't
Mhm.
have too much to do with the technology. Like Depollier, on the other hand, he owned the Dubois Watch Case Company, which was located in Brooklyn, New York, at 312 Herkimer Street.
Mhm,
It
mhm.
was a rather large building. You can see it right there on the
I,
wall
I I
behind you.
see.
That
Yeah,
was
yeah. I
Depollyer's
see.
factory.
So that's
Uh,
Brooklyn, New York.
yes, yes, yes.
Nice.
Unfortunately,
Uh-huh.
that building is not still there.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
It's been torn down, but it's good for the children of the neighborhood. It's now a park, basketball courts, playground,
Mhm, mhm,
tennis courts, something like that, I believe.
mhm,
But Depollier actually worked in his own R&D department. I mean, he
mhm,
wasn't just the money businessman like Wilsdorf. He
mhm,
actually invented and developed the technology himself.
mhm.
Um, so the kind of a big difference between those two gentlemen.
Yeah. So in terms of yeah, so this is yeah. So he's like real like I want to say horologist, maybe not,
Yeah, well, yes. I
but
mean,
he's like yeah,
yes, yes. I
yeah.
mean, they
Mhm,
sold, and
mhm.
there was a lot of the problem with finding all of this information.
I can
Um,
imagine.
yes, I was starting from zero, from scratch, uh,
Mhm,
and I remember one of the first watch books I ever bought was written by Faber.
mhm,
Back in, I believe it was like 93 or 96, he came out with his
mhm.
book about American watchmaking and American
Oh,
watches.
Aaron Faber, right? I met him
Yeah, yeah,
in.
yeah,
I just visited Miami Antique Watch Show. I met him there. Yeah,
yeah,
very
yeah,
nice
yeah.
guy. Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And he had a watch. He had
Mhm.
the Depollier waterproof watch in that book back in the 90s. And he even shows it with the original factory box. I believe there's
I
only
think it's
two of
even on the
those.
title. I think it's even one of the watches on the title of his book. Am I
It
right?
might be. It might be. I
Uh-huh,
can't remember
uh-huh.
for sure.
Mhm,
As
mhm.
soon as I saw that, I was like, what is this? And it even says right on the box, Depollier waterproof box, patented in 1918. And I was like, well, wow, that's a little weird, because I grew up in a Rolex family. My stepfather, my mother, my aunts and uncles, all wore Rolex, mostly Datejusts. So I kind of grew up around, nice, mid to higher end pieces, when I was a child. So, and I was always told that Rolex was the world's first waterproof wristwatch. And I'm looking at Faber's book and I'm like, well, how is that when it's, 1918, stamped on this box that says waterproof watch. So that is where my curiosity was really piqued, and I started taking a very, very, very hard look at Mr. Charles Depollier.
Hey Stan, can I interrupt you? Any chance do you have that watch around? Maybe you can show it like in the camera. I
Sure.
know it's not gonna not nice. Look at that, guys.
Yes,
That's a highly unusual.
this is the design that was approved by the United States Army, by the United States Bureau of Standards, and by the 7-member United States Army Executive Board that consisted of several high-ranking United States Army officers. So this wasn't just a thing where, trust me, this story is so incredible. The Americans were far more advanced than anyone ever gives them credit for, especially the Swiss, when it comes to testing. Was this actually going to be good for military applications? Because Charles Depollier actually created this watch specifically for trench warfare.
Because
sure
World War
the
One.
pictures of World War One battlefields, trenches on either sides, and then no man's land in the middle. And usually no man's land was filled with very deep craters from the millions upon millions of 47 millimeter shells that were being lobbed from both ends, and these craters would fill with water. And due to the hot and cold temperatures, watch cases started to fail. The crystals started falling out. I've read reports of Charles Depollier getting data back from the field about how military watches are literally failing. And he stepped up to the plate and literally solved the problem for the United States military.
Very nice. And so you mentioned a little bit about testing, and was it like ordered by the military?
This was a long, grueling process. It wasn't like you just say, "Hey, United States Army, I have a watch. I say it's waterproof. I'd like you to buy, thousands of them." Yeah, it doesn't work like that. Not even a little bit. There is a lengthy, drawn-out process. First, it has to go through the United States Bureau of Standards. Now, the Bureau was America's very first physical science laboratory, founded by the United States Congress in 1901, and it was located in Washington, D.C. They did all of the testing. The Bureau did, whether it be for a utility cart, a raincoat. I mean, all of these things had to be inspected and approved before the military would, sign a contract with you. They would do, and it wasn't just timing tests. They would put them, as you can see in my latest book, I even put pictures of it in there. They had hot and cold tanks where they would raise the temperature up to a couple of hundred degrees and then lower it down, I believe, to like -30, maybe -40 degrees in these giant cooling tanks. And then they would go back and do timing tests. This was basically just for the movements. I couldn't find the exact what they did for waterproof testing other than tank testing, but the movements would have to go through a lengthy process. You'd have to fill out I even put a picture of the application to do business with the United States Army. And when I was figuring all this out, there were When I said I started from scratch, I mean, I literally did. There was just zero information. Nobody has written a book about this. You can see some articles about Depollier technology, but it's few and far in between. Rolex gets all the credit for this. Let me think here. Now, about the Bureau standards, the Bureau, first, the United States, oh, wait, hold on, let me go back even a little bit further. First, I had to figure out who was actually in charge of purchasing the watches. And shockingly, it was, everything went through pre-1918, everything went through the United States Army Signal Corps Division. The United States Army Signal Corps Division was basically, they did, all the wiring for communications, what they're basically, that's what they're best known for. They were also the technology department. The highly educated men, not saying that an infantryman isn't educated, but back then, a lot of these guys were farmers, factory workers, and then there were your educated men that were the officers. And these men that had backgrounds in science and engineering were recruited into the Signal Corps Division, aka the Technology Department. And Charles Depollier went to Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1918, and he had meetings with several high-ranking officers, from lieutenants, colonels, lieutenant colonels, generals. And the watch that he brought in is not the watch that came out. As you can see from those two advertisements we originally discussed, that was generation one. And then when it went into for testing, that's where it kind of splits off a little bit, this story, because they had to come up with a mil spec.
So did the spec exist? Did the spec exist
previously before this watch? No. There was no mil spec in the United States for a waterproof wristwatch.
I guess because it wasn't technology that anybody would imagine could have existed, right? So there was no mil spec because of that.
Correct. It was actually, the mil spec was drafted by the United States Army Signal Corps Engineering and Research Division and Charles Depollier. They wrote it together.
I see.
And during these several meetings in Washington, D.C., that Charles Depollier would actually jump on a train and go to Washington, D.C. for these meetings in person to discuss what's good, what's bad, what do we need to change. They didn't like the crown on that Mr. Mortimer Golden. The Mortimer Golden crown, a Charles Depollier employee, originally they went with his crown for the design of the watch. And then when the United States Army started doing beta testing, basically testing on the wrist, and waterproof testing, they realized that the crown was too high. It was sitting too high up on the wrist, and it was getting caught, on their shirt sleeves and digging into the back of their wrist due to it protruding too high.
So it was I just want to mention that's some serious testing. It's not just some hot and cold and submerging into water. They actually used it in some. They wore it for some time. They got some feedback how it feels. Nice.
I mean, it wasn't real world testing. They were testing. They were wear them, walk them around drunk, take them home, come back to the office just for comfort.
Nice.
And see if this is going to impede. I mean, if you're holding a gun and you can't bend the wrist all the way back to the ground protruding out, they just didn't like it. And they told Depollier, listen, you're going to have to change this. So Depollier went back to Brooklyn. And remember, when I said there were 4 different waterproof crown designs being developed, it looks like they then went to the Mr. Tough design. for a very short period of time. And you can see this, you can see the crown changes as they progressed in the advertisements as everything's happening. Because usually advertisements would, take 1 to 3 months to go to print.
So he was already advertising Gen 1, and after that, he was advertising
and then the
next.
crown changed for he actually had 2 different references going. The Waltham Depollier Thermo waterproof watch was the high-end version of the Waltham Depollier Field and Marine. They were advertised separately. They were 2 separate references. Both used high-end 15 joule movements, but the case material, the case back disc was different. I mean, it really truly was. So Rolex was really if you want to get very technical, the world's 3rd waterproof watch.
Oh yeah, we'll tell you. I'm going to ask you, but yeah, I'm going to ask you about that. So what's this? Can I ask you?
Let me get back to what the Army did with Depollier, and then Depollier went back to Brooklyn, and started making watches with his crown on it, with his own specific design, and brought it back. And it looks like that's the one that the United States Army approved. And the United States Army has a lot more to do with the story than anyone ever realized. Here, I'll show you the Thermo.
Oh, yes. Oh, nice.
Yes, this is the only Waltham Depollier Thermo currently known to exist in the world. It's the only one.
Nice.
But you can see this right here, this notch, and this notch right here. Those were designed specifically for case key technology, the key that we use today, that Rolex didn't patent until 1931, to open and close the cases. You have to use a key to, tighten it down for that true watertight seal. That technology was not developed by Rolex. That was actually developed. That was the United States Army's idea.
Oh, I see.
When Depollier's case went in there, it actually had very deep groove coin edge bezel and case back. So you could only get it finger tight. Okay. And the U.S. Army decided, listen, we can get this a little bit tighter for the better seal if we design a tool. So they removed all of the deep grooves on the bezel and on the case back, and they only left 2 of them on opposite sides. So you can stick the key in there and tighten it or tighten it. Yes.
Yeah. Also, it looks so good. Like when I'm looking at these old Waltham watches with these two grooves, like I thought maybe it's just a visual thing. Like the Omega is making these Constellation Manhattans. They also have like similar thing, but that's more like a visual thing. But Depollier actually
those 2 notches actually did serve a scientific purpose. And this technology is still pretty much utilized by everybody today that makes a time watch. You have to have the key to open and close it. And that technology did, in fact, was developed in cooperation between Charles Depollier and the United States Army in 1918. So that's 2 aspects of the case that the United States Army, and this all goes into the mil spec of how they wanted the watch rather than how Charles Depollier originally designed it. And then another thing, you can see, I don't happen to have a fully intact one with me here today, but you can see there is a groove and a recessed section of this case back right here. Now, this was probably a little bit of over-engineering by the United States Army Engineering and Research Division, who was in charge of making all these changes to get to their mil spec, how they wanted the watch. So it probably was over-engineered a little bit. But they decided that there was too much heat transference between the body heat and the case back. that the oils were getting dried out in the watch movement. So they decided to add on this piece right here. Underneath here, there would be a bracket. And then on top of that bracket, there would be a tiny little sliver of an asbestos disc. It was as thin as a dime, but about the size of a United States quarter. And then on top of that, there was a third piece. And it was either sterling silver or solid 14 karat gold. Now, the sterling silver versions, if you ever see one that's still fully intact, that sterling silver disc means that that watch was originally purchased by the United States Army. And on that disc, it's going to say USA. USA does not stand for United States of America. It stands for United States Army. And then there was a serial number stamped into that. It would be 1 through 10,000 because the Army bought 10,000 of these waterproof watch cases.
So they actually made the contract and
yes, most certainly, most certainly. But I mean, the trials going through this, this took approximately it took approximately 5 to 6 months, I believe, for this whole process to play out. With Depollier taking many trips to Washington, D.C. to meet with the members. And then once they finally got the design all squared out, a officer named Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Mawborn, he was the commander of the U.S. Army Signal Corps Engineering and Research Division. He was also one of those 7 members of the U.S. Army Executive Board. He was also in charge of all scientific testing for watches at the United States Bureau of Standards. Now, he told Depollier himself that this watch is all right. It is waterproof. We have tested it. And I have sworn court testimony that proves this. And I have a signed letter from Lieutenant Colonel Mawborn acting as one of the 7 members of the U.S. Army Executive Board. I have a U.S. Army document from the archives with his signature on it approving these watches for purchase, saying that it has been approved by his department for purchase. It gets even better than that. The U.S. the militaries around the world love their annual reports. What's going on? What have we bought? What is the state of the state? Kind of like the State of the Union. In the United States, we do have checks and balances. So everyone has to write the reports. Everybody, has to answer to Congress. So the ranking officer of the United States Army Signal Corps Division, his name, he was a 2-star general. His name was, I believe, George Squire. Now, all of this that was happening was right at the end of the war with Charles Depollier and the Army. And once all of this was approved, it then started funneling down into the reports that they have to give into their higher-ups. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Mawborn of the Engineering and Research Division reported directly to Major General George Squire, Chief Signal Officer of the U.S. Army. In turn, he wrote a report to the United States Secretary of War, a man named Mr. Newton Baker, I believe. Now, this is the Secretary of War today. This is known as the Secretary of Defense. This is a cabinet position in the United States government. I'm sure we've all seen those tables where the president is sitting in the middle and there's like 12 other people sitting at that very long table. Those are his cabinet meetings. So the Secretary of War reported directly to the president, who at that time was President Woodrow Wilson. And In this report from General George Squire, it clearly states in this report, right there in black and white, after examining many designs, i.e., the different crown designs that were inspected by the Bureau of Standards and by Lieutenant Colonel Mawborn's team, after inspecting many designs, we have finally adopted a design of a waterproof watch case that can actually run for several weeks underwater. Right there
Whoa.
in an official United States
Whoa.
government report. Oh, it gets even better. Then there was a man named Mr. Benedict Crowell. He was the Assistant Secretary of War, but he was in charge of all munitions for the United States government. And in early 1919, he also wrote a report to the Congress of the United States, all that oversight stuff of what they're doing. And in that report, titled 1917 to 1918 America's Munitions, the official report of Assistant Secretary of War Benedict Crowell on, this is a very long report. These reports, they're about like this thick. He even states on there that we have adopted a waterproof watch case that requires a special tool to gain access to the movement. He is, in fact, talking about case key technology, where you have to use a key to open, close the case. So that is in this, I mean, Depollier's technology is literally mentioned in not one, but two official United States government reports. I mean, and this was done at the highest levels.
That is amazing that you found all this documentation.
And believe me, this advertisements are easy to find. I mean, with artificial intelligence, you can find just about anything online these days. But there is a big difference between the internet and intranets. The Digital Hefi Trust it's a public intranet site. It's a cooperation between about 50 United States top-end universities, where the students just scan documents, scan them and load, scan and load. And that is where I found most of my clues to bring this story to life.
Very nice.
Because you can go ahead and Google Depollier, and you're not going to find the same
yeah.
Google that you would on the Digital Hefi Trust. So this is kind of where it gets interesting. All of these Depollier advertisements, I found them, you know, as soon as I looked at Faber's book, I started looking all this stuff up, and I'm like, there it is again, Depollier waterproof watch. And this is, you know, a full 8 years before the 26 Oyster. And I'm like, but in my opinion, advertisements aren't truth of anything. This was well before the FTC Act of, what was it, 1960, I believe, the Federal Trade Commission Act that deals with truth in advertising. Before
no, but it also,
West,
yeah,
you could say whatever you wanted, and you know, no one's going to call you out if you know you were, you know, publishing some things about your product that weren't true. And that went for other products as well, you know, like snake oil and elixirs,
I see.
all that kind of stuff. There were, it's once again, I was starting from zero. It's nice to have an advertisement, but an advertisement literally isn't proof. You have to have the military documents, pages of them, not just one. So how this all happened, basically, a very good friend of mine and fellow author, and his knowledge is extraordinary when it comes to the Illinois brand of watches. He's written, I believe, six books about early
I know.
watches.
These like thick, I think I saw that.
That 5-volume set that weighed like 50 pounds. Yeah, thanks, Fred. I almost, you know, pulled a hernia lifting that thing up the stairs, but it's awesome. We have been sharing information on our research, because a lot of our research overlapped one another.
Mm-hmm.
He does, Depollier, early trench watches and stuff into the 1920s, and I specifically do, stay in the realm of trench watches for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And we became very good friends. And we started sharing our research information, which just made his book better, which made my book better. But what he found several years ago, and I know exactly where he found the clue in the Jeweler Circular Weekly.
Mm-hmm.
They would give updates about topics in the trades, new patents, new patent applications, technology advancements, and in there, on one little page in the article was only about like this big. It said that a gentleman named Mortimer Golden had sued Charles Depollier over royalties uh,
Uh-huh.
for the Gen 1 crown that the U.S. Army wanted changed. They didn't like it, remember?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So Mr. Mortimer Golden didn't receive any royalties for his patent. And he got
Uh-huh.
a bit upset over this, obviously. So he sued Charles Depollier in the Southern District of New York federal court,
Mm-hmm.
because this had to do with patents, so it was federal court instead of state. Um, and that is where the bulk of the information that we have today came from. All I did was go back and find the military documents that
Ah, I see.
corroborate
It's the
this.
one that
But what
they
Mr. Fred Freeberg did,
referenced. Uh-huh.
he Fred was a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
uh, corporate lawyer, and he had some friends in New York, and he decided, hey, just for giggles, let's see if the file is still there. And they went down to the records room, and they actually found
They
the
found. Oh my
lawsuit
God.
file. It's still there in the basement, man, in the box.
Nice. Uh-huh.
And we got scanned
Mhm.
copies
Mhm.
of.
And when you say file, it's not a digital file. That's actually a paper file, like the
Oh
old
yeah, yeah.
piece
I
of
mean, these
paper. Yeah.
documents are literally 4 years old now,
Uh-huh,
105,
uh-huh.
120
Nice.
years
Uh-huh.
old.
Nice.
Um, and we scanned the testimony, which
Nice.
is just, it blew my mind. I mean, honestly, my hands started shaking a little bit when Fred shared these documents with me. It is literally Charles Depollier's firsthand account of how all of this happened with the United States Army. Because he obviously said the U.S. Army didn't like your crown, Mr. Golden. They said it was uncomfortable. It kept getting caught on their shirt sleeves. It wouldn't be a
Uh-huh.
practical thing for field usage and
Mm-hmm.
for warfare, in the European theater. And he got very upset. But Charles, and I believe like 6 or 8 different people testified during this trial. It
Mm-hmm.
was a short trial. I believe it was only one day long. But within this, Charles Depollier gives his firsthand account of how all of this happened. Names,
Oh,
dates, places, ranks of military
nice.
officers,
Uh-huh.
where they met, what was discussed, what they wanted on this waterproof watch. They discussed all the changes for the official United States Army mil-spec design, which they list in detail. And
Oh.
this information the mil-spec can be found in this lawsuit file and in the United States Army records, which I'm going to get to in a second.
Uh-huh.
So this was like really the leap forward when Fred
Mm-hmm.
Freeberg shared his information with me. And I took it from there because honestly, my research was stuck. I had been doing this for well over a decade already, and
Mm-hmm.
it turns out I was looking in all the wrong places. The contract between the United States Army and Depollier wasn't even between the United States Army and Depollier. It was
Oh.
actually, the contract was signed between the United States War Department
Mm.
and Depollier's, basically their parent company, the Dubois Watch Case Company. were the names that were actually on there. When I say Depollier, most people think of Jacques Depollier and Son, because that's how the majority of the watch cases are signed. But the actual contract with the government went through the parent company's name, and I lost years going
Oh, I
down
see.
rabbit holes that just led me to dead ends. But now, once we got the information that we actually needed to find with the names, with the correct names, it only took me about 6 months to hit pay dirt.
To find all this.
Now, what I did, now that I had all these names and the actual divisions that were in charge of this, of testing the technology, changing the technology to the mil spec that the Army wanted, that's when things really started to heat up. This was all during COVID, so it took a bit longer than I would have liked it to. Obviously, the National Archives were closed for quite some time, and then when they reopened, there was obviously a long waiting list to get in there, so you had to wait sometimes several weeks, up to a month or longer, to get an appointment. And then I got COVID again. So what I did was I hired a professional researcher who was a former federal prosecutor and a United States Marine officer. So yes, yeah, I chose to work with someone who is familiar with federal documents and how to look for them. But it wasn't cheap, because he takes an hourly rate. And whether he finds the documents or not where I tell him to look, I still have to ante up the cash. And we kept striking out. And there's not just one depot for records for the National Archives. There are dozens of them in Washington, D.C. and around the country. And a lot of these documents were moved. But I was finally able to locate the file number for this, for Depollier's waterproof watches. But one of two things happened. The file was misplaced within the National Archives, or it's just been lost in time. So that was kind of a real letdown. So I started taking other avenues. I mean, we have this, now we know that the Signal Corps was in charge. We know that there was a 7-member executive board that made these decisions for purchase. And then there was the Bureau of Standards and the Engineering and Research Division. So I just started, putting in 18-hour days, 7 days a week. Just on a little bit, having a little bit of OCD on a quest like this is actually a good thing. I mean, there were just mountains of notes and places to look in the National Archives, and after an exhaustive search by me and my research assistant, we hit pay dirt one day. We actually remember those 2 reports that I mentioned. Those come back to be very, very important. Because what happened, why a lot of the records were gone, those records were taken and they were put in a different file. The source material file for the report, the annual report of the Chief Signal Officer to the Secretary of War, and the Assistant Secretary of War's report to the United States Congress. So all these files were put into that file. And that turned out to be the United States Army's firsthand account of how all this happened. So we don't have one, we have 2 out of all the letters between these high-ranking U.S. Army officers saying that, listen, we have watches that are failing in the field. We're experiencing like a 30% failure rate in the trenches. Something's got to be done. This can't stand. And then all of a sudden somebody jumps in like about 5 or 6 pages deep into this file and says, listen, there's this guy named Charles Depollier. He's got this waterproof watch. We've tested it. but we want to make a few other changes to draft the mill spec for
Nice.
the United States Army's first waterproof watch, and it literally lists out what they want to see, in detail about the spec disc, about the key, about removing all the notches and only leaving two, the
Nice.
insulated, asbestos disc that's covered by silver or gold. I mean, it's just, and Charles Depollier's sworn court testimony in federal court is completely and utterly corroborated by the United States Army letters that I have, and it's not just one.
Nice.
There's a stack of them about this big.
Nice.
They were even so impressed with Depollier's technology and what this was going to be able to do for them that Brigadier General Saltzman wrote a letter saying that, listen, we don't want 10,000 of these. Now we're thinking about buying an additional 5,000 more. But I couldn't confirm that there was ever a contract written to bump up the order from 10,000 to 15,000. So I'm going to keep that number that the U.S. Army purchased at 10,000 for right now, unless other documents that can completely corroborate General Saltzman's letter. Until that data can be found, I'm going to keep the number at 10,000. And I've already read a few people on social media, because we've obviously been following each other on Instagram for quite some time now.
Yep.
I'm familiar with what you do, vice versa, and you've seen.
I've seen you on Watch UC and NWR for very, very long, for years. I was following your posts. Yeah.
And somebody chimed in, and he was a little bit angry. It seemed like, well, Rolex had the first commercially successful watch. I'm like, well,
10,000.
No, it didn't, because as a matter of fact, well, Depollier sold 10,000 units to the United States War Department, but these watches were also available for general public purchases. You could walk right into a Depollier AD and buy this watch right from underneath the glass in the showroom.
That's why he advertised, because he was there.
That's why he advertised. He had a sales force that would go out and do sales calls all around the country. It was split up into basically time zone sales zones. He had the East Coast, Central, and West Coast times, and he had guys literally riding around on trains doing sales calls. I've read the stories of this myself. I mean, so it's just absurd. Trying to say, well, Rolex was the first commercially successful. No, it was not.
Nice.
I mean, go ahead.
So Stan, can I ask you, because we all collect watches, and military watch collecting is like a big theme. Do you know if any of these, because this first 10,000 or 15,000, right? Those are probably the world's first military issued waterproof watches. Are any of them around? Are they are they good to wear? Like how? What do you know about them?
They're very comfortable to wear. Obviously, I don't wear the thermo too much.
Yeah, so that one probably is. Yeah.
But you know what? The Waltham Watch Company is currently owned by a gentleman named Antonio Di Benedetto. And he bought Waltham about a decade ago, give or take. I actually met Tony for the first time at the JKC show in Las Vegas when Danny was his sales manager. And we developed a very good friendship. He was in my Waltham book. Hold on a sec here. Well, this is my
book. Guys, Stan wrote a lot of books, and he researched a lot of topics.
Here's my second book, Waltham Trench Watches of the Great War.
We should do another live stream, maybe just on Waltham, on Waltham, but
And
yeah,
then here's my latest.
that's the waterproof watch.
About the world's first water, and we'll get
Mhm.
to this here in a second.
Mhm.
Um, well, when I met Tony, we developed a friendship. And through my research, um, he decided to bring back the Field and Marine watch. And about 2 years ago, they brought me on as their chief historian. First, it started out with, "Hey, can you write some bullet points for us for the new Field and Marine?" I'm like, "Well, sure. Send me some photographs, your design models, your prototype pictures." And then that turned into, "Can you write a script for us?" And I'm like, "Well, I've never written a script before, but how hard could it be?" So I decided to write a script for them, and they liked the script. And then it turned into, "Well, hey, how would you like to star in the promotional videos?" And I think you've seen those promotional
I've
videos.
seen some.
Yeah,
I've seen some.
there's a museum called the Museum of the American
Mhm.
GI,
Mhm.
only about an hour north of me here in Texas.
Mhm.
And they built a humongous World War I trench warfare complex. They have a very large property. And as you can see in that video, I mean, it looks exactly like a World War I trench. And we hired an actor. We put the watch on him, and he was in full World War I doughboy out, military uniform. And we had him running around in the water. We wanted to show what the watch was actually designed for.
Mhm.
And that video was pretty popular on
Oh
YouTube and on
yeah.
the social media channels.
So
Um,
that actor is actually wearing the reissue of the Waltham, right?
what's
It's
that?
not the actor in that video is wearing the reissue,
No, he's
model.
wearing the original.
Oh, he's wearing the original, one
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
time.
yeah. He's
Oh,
wearing the
nice.
original.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
And it was a cold day because we
Mhm.
filmed that in the wintertime. And he was a very he was a sport about it.
Oh, by the
Because
way,
it had just rained,
uh,
just like
so,
it would in
mhm.
during World War
Uh-huh.
One, and the street was filled up with water. Okay,
Uh-huh.
and it was about like 45 degrees that morning when we were filming, and I was like, "Listen, is there any chance we can get you to run through the water for an action shot?" And
Oh, nice.
I'm like, "You got a girlfriend?" And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, here." I handed him $100. I'm like, "Here, take your wife or girlfriend out for a nice dinner tonight." And he was kind enough to run through that very cold
Nice.
water for us.
Do you have that watch? Maybe
Yeah,
you can
this is
show
the one
people.
that we used
Oh, that's
little
nice.
short video. Yeah, the
These are
original
so
building.
nice. These are so can I ask you a few questions about this watch that you showed us?
Sure.
So how big is it? Is it still waterproof? Did you guys had the chance to pressure test? How does Depollier technology
This
still?
watch is the original Field and Marines.
Mm-hmm,
This is the U.S. Army approved version.
mm-hmm.
They are 36 millimeters in diameter.
Whoa,
I believe
nice.
lug tip to lug tip, it is 40, 44 to 46 with a 16 millimeter strap.
That's a very nice modern. Like I
Yeah,
love
it is
this.
significantly bigger. Your average World War I trench watch,
Yeah.
the case diameter was approximately 31 to 32 millimeters. So
Mm-hmm.
this was about 10 to 15%. They literally brought back the Field and Marine. This is the all black version.
Mm-hmm.
This comes in a three hand. And then they also made a dual time. You notice that the DNA of the original is still found on the new ones that they're
Mm-hmm.
making today. Um, so it's just, and here is another one. I think I have six of them here, but I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to. you you get the
Mm-hmm.
idea. They're selling very well. They're very popular. They're even having a new one that's being issued, I believe, on Thursday through Watch
Mm-hmm.
Angels. Watch Angels are the ones that actually manufacture this today.
Mm-hmm.
All new Walthams today are made in Mendrisio, Switzerland.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. So sorry, I'm gonna be asking you questions about the vintage one.
Sure.
Just because my channel is about vintage, and most people who watch me, they are collecting vintage watches. So that's why I'm so interested about the original Field and Marine, because it's a good size. This is amazing, because yeah, as you said, most of trench watches, they are pretty small to be wearable. Did you guys have a chance to pressure test that original Field and Marine? Does the original Depollier technology still holds almost 100 years
I have
later or not?
personally not tested it to see if it's still waterproof.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be opposed to it.
Mm-hmm.
The most of the gaskets that you're going to find in this watch,
Mm-hmm.
and there are several. This is a 3-piece case.
Aha, yeah, because it's on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a 3-piece case.
Uh-huh.
There are gaskets in the crown. There are
Mm-hmm.
gaskets in the bezel, and
Mm-hmm.
actually the gaskets are in the case center as
Mm-hmm.
well, on the bezel and on the case back.
Mm-hmm.
He experimented with cork and leather, oil
Mm-hmm.
saturated leather, and cork, and it
Mm-hmm.
worked. He actually discusses, Charles Depollier does,
Mm-hmm.
about using rubber gaskets, which is what Hans Wilsdorf used in 26, was rubber.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly how the technology was for rubber in when he was developing this in late 1917, early 1918, when he was first getting started on this new model. But a friend of mine, Mr. Cliff Diamond, just had a Field and Marine that he just scored like 2 or 3 days ago, and he took it apart. He sent me some pictures of it, and all of the gaskets are still there.
Nice. Yeah,
So,
I know. So I know that Francois Bourgel used cork gaskets. I never heard that somebody used the leather gaskets. That's very interesting.
and and Depollier said he believed that rubber would deteriorate faster than the leather or the cork.
Yeah,
So,
and that's
this
what we
was
see with
almost
modern
a
watches. Yeah.
decade before Rolex.
Mm-hmm.
He even says in there, this watch was tested. This watch was tested in water pressure. I
Mm-hmm.
cannot find the exact amount of pressure that they put on these watches,
Mm-hmm.
but it states not one, not two, but in several different places that the watch was in fact not be opposed.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably take the movement out first and then
Oh
put the
yeah,
case
definitely.
back
Yeah.
together,
Mm-hmm.
and save myself several hours of work in case those gaskets did deteriorate too much. I wouldn't be opposed to it.
Yeah, it would be just something that would be interesting. So I know. So first of all, I'm a big believer in using old watches how they were supposed to. So I'm swimming with vintage watch, but those are watches from like 60s, 70s, and that the Depollier technology that you explained, especially if it has cork gaskets. Theoretically, these gaskets probably still hold.
You know
Anyways,
what? When somebody brings up deteriorating cork gaskets, what immediately comes to mind is two things: the Titanic and Ernest Shackleton. I distinctly remember bottles of spirits being brought up from the bottom of the ocean in the Titanic wreck, and you know
still
what?
good.
The liquor in those bottles was still good.
Yep.
Also, when Shackleton went to the South Pole, I believe it was the second or third time. That's when he had that tragedy when his ship sank below the ice. They brought all the liquor off of the boat and stored it at their base camp, and then they had to abandon base camp. And then, nearly 100 years later, some other explorers came across his base camp site, and there was some Scotch whiskey there. That cork that was sitting in Antarctica for 100 years, the cork was still good,
Still
and the
good.
spirits were still good. So,
yeah.
if you don't think cork would work, or saturated leather, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he used as his gasket, because the United States government officially certified it as waterproof.
Yep.
So the point is moot what he used. I mean, unless Rolex wants to,
But
put an asterisk next to their name.
what I'm trying to say is everybody is using rubber right now, and we know that rubber fails. Rubber will
most
work,
certainly.
especially like I'm swimming with my watches. I'm changing these rubber gaskets every like 3-4 years. But cork actually holds much better, and I think cork might still be good despite the almost 100 years.
I mean, and once again, Charles Depollier didn't just slap this stuff together. He obviously experimented with rubber and found that the oil soaked leather and cork would work better for him. But if I ever find any further data on that, I'll of course post it on my webpage or social media. I wouldn't do an update to the book. I'll just put it out there.
Make a video on your channel. We all want to see.
Another interesting aspect of this. Let's talk about the advertising.
Rolex. The same page, 19 to on official Rolex website where they talk about first waterproof watch. You scroll a little bit down, and you see that they don't show the fish tank anymore, but they show the plane going over the Everest.
Let me gather my thoughts for a second.
It's on the official Rolex website. How can it be?
There is literally, I have zero doubt that Hans Wilsdorf was absolutely, positively, fully aware of Charles Depollier. He was fully aware of his technology, because it's quite evident that the Jeweler Circular Weekly and the Keystone Jewelry and Trade magazines found their way over to Europe. And I'm specifically referencing the Depollier fishbowl advertisements and the Depollier Mount Everest advertisements. He did these from 1918 until the end of 1920, I believe. He is the one that started all this. Okay. Now, the very first advertisement ever for a Depollier waterproof wristwatch, this is where I got this from. This was dead center of the advertisement. And you can clearly see it says Waltham right there. And this is the Gen 1 design that you're looking at.
That's that funny crown.
Yes, that's the crown that the U.S. Army didn't like. That was Depollier's registered trademarked logo. Okay, he started using that in 1918, and he prominently had the fishbowl in several of his advertisements. It's not always big. Sometimes it's just a little thing down at the bottom corner, but it's still there on a lot of them. And this was something that Rolex would incorporate for themselves. Now, there's an earlier report from somebody using this, using the fishbowl technique back in 1851, like 170 years ago, at the World's Fair, I believe it was, where someone was trying to demonstrate a watch in a fishbowl. It's no picture of it, no scientific data. I'm not saying that it didn't happen, but if it truly worked, why wasn't that technology adapted, improved upon by the horological dealers, manufacturers, everybody?
So in that time, it was there was no the wristwatches were not popular. So even if that happened, it was for the pocket watch. I've heard like Francois Bourgeal made waterproof pocket watches that were not popular, but it did happen. So it's possible for something like that, but it was definitely not the world's first waterproof wristwatch. So that's what we are talking about today.
Yes, and then Rolex incorporated this, and they still use the fishbowl. I don't know if they're still using it lately, but well into the 1960s, they were showing date justs because if I'm not wrong, I believe every Rolex today is an oyster, correct?
Uh,
I think it is, because every
I think
Rolex
no,
is
no.
an
They
oyster.
have some Cellinis that are not waterproof, but most of them are oysters.
Yeah. So meaning that it's waterproof.
Yeah.
And then Rolex, when Charles Depollier went out of business for good around 1926, give or take, um, his trademark on that expired because he was no longer using it. And then Rolex started using it for themselves. But it's a little bit weird. Then this is where the story takes a little bit of a strange turn. In 1919, September of 1919, an American pilot named Roland Rolfs set a new flight altitude world record, okay, of like 34,000 feet and change. And after that, I mean, and during his flight, the Army always liked to do testing. If they can test one thing, they're gonna throw a few more things on that airplane to test everything else they have, right? Never miss an opportunity. And so Roland Rolfs was given a Waltham Depollier Field and Marine waterproof watch, and he took it up to 34,000 feet. And they had other scientific um, uh, uh, measurement taking instruments on there. Are you there?
Oh yeah, I'm.
Okay.
Sorry. Did they freeze?
No, they did not, and they actually give the exact temperatures,
Uh-huh.
what it was at high altitude and what it was at ground level, and the watch performed perfectly. And Mr. Roland Rolfs wrote a very nice letter to Charles Depollier, giving praise to his waterproof watch that can handle also extremes of cold temperatures, of wild temperature fluctuations, in this testimony letter, which is another thing that Rolex claims to have created on their webpage. It says that we created the testimony concept in 1927 when Mercedes Glitza attempted to swim the English Channel with a Rolex oyster chained around her neck. Okay, and the weird thing about this is how can you create the testimony concept first and foremost when Charles Depollier was already doing testimonial concepts for advertising in 1918. And even earlier than that, the Elgin National Watch Company debuted their very first men's wristwatch, the very first one they ever made, at the third running of the Indianapolis 500 in 1913. All the Case team drivers were wearing the new Elgin wristwatch. And after the race, they all became brand ambassadors. They did advertising with them, showing them in their race cars wearing the watch on their wrist. So, I mean, when Rolex says they invented the testimony concept, basically, I mean, that's just hogwash because the Americans were already doing it for 13 or 14 years.
Yep. Stan, sorry to interrupt you. For some reason, I think my video disappeared. Do you see me now?
Nope, I have a black screen for
yeah.
you.
You can hear me, but for some reason YouTube doesn't like us today. I don't know why.
Yeah, I can't see you, but I can hear you. So let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going. So sorry guys about this. It's probably
and then
some like
it's
Rolex
when
interferes with this live stream.
Now, when Roland Rolfs, after his world record breaking flight, Depollier did a series of advertisements, showing the airplane, showing Mount Everest. And there were like 5 key features in this advertisement, including the letter that he wrote. In 1933, when Rolex flew over Everest, they also did an exact same advertisement.
Yep.
One other, social media gentleman, called it copy, click, and paste advertising. As we know.
Guys, go to Rolex.com and take a look at that lead. That looks like copy paste. This is terrible.
Yes, I mean, and
I see it right now.
When the Rolex pilot that flew over Everest, he gives the temperatures of high and low during their flight from ground level up to over Everest. And you know what? The Waltham Depollier flew higher. It flew in more extreme temperatures than the Rolex 13 years later. And it's weird. The pilot testimonial for the Rolex said, I can hardly imagine any watch being able to withstand these extreme conditions. Well, Depollier did that 13 years earlier. I mean, so it was weird. Wilsdorf just seemed to have this weird thing going on where he was, it would be apparent that he was completely and utterly jealous of Depollier. He copied his advertisements. And even in one of his advertisements from the 1930s, he attempts to throw shade at Depollier. And by doing so, gives absolute proof that he was aware of Depollier's waterproof watch. He mentions the asbestos case, the case back disc. That technology was only found on Depollier's watch. No other watch was ever manufactured like that in the world before.
So he knew.
So Wilsdorf was absolutely aware of Depollier. Yet on November 24th, 1927, shortly after Glitza attempted to swim the English Channel, he proclaimed what was the exact words? The greatest triumph in watchmaking, which was the waterproof watch. But I'm sorry, Hans, that had already been done, tested and approved by the United States federal government 8 years earlier. So I don't know what your deal was. And maybe he was trying to be like P.T. Barnum and just talk up, talk up his product, but the technology was already out. And the weird thing about all that was Rolex in 1922, I believe it was, introduced not the Submariner, but the submarine. Okay, and when he released it, the technology was already archaic. The submarine featured case inside of another case technology. So you'd have to
I know
unscrew
the one.
the first case. Then you'd have to swing it out. Then you'd have to wind the secondary case. Then you'd have to put it back in the outer case, and then literally screw the top of the watch case back, the top of the outer case back on. And if you do that every day to wind your watch, that metal on metal friction is going to deteriorate the watch and make it non-waterproof. And they even mentioned that, on their webpage. I mean, so when Charles Depollier already had a screw-down crown, case key technology, a full mil spec, and had already sold 10,000 to the United States Army. Rolex introduced, 4 years later, archaic technology that was ancient. It was outdated. So it's just weird how all of this happened. I mean, I am sorry for Rolex's misfortune in all of this, but they literally were not the world's first waterproof watch. Military documents have always been considered the holy grail of evidence, the benchmark. I mean, literally, that is the end all be all. And there is page upon page of corroborating evidence between Charles Depollier's testimony, the letters from the United States Army, the two official United States government reports. I mean, in my opinion, Rolex should stop saying that they were the world's first. They were absolutely, positively, it's clear that they were not. And my research is starting to be accepted by scholars, watch journalists, around the world.
Yeah, we need to spread this knowledge more. Unfortunately, the big publications like YouTube, not YouTube, the like Hodinky, Born and Wound, all
Well,
these auction houses,
I have learned that there is a
yeah,
difference
yeah, they keep
between a watch
spreading what
journalist
yeah.
and someone that you're in business with. Because I mean, you're not going to say anything bad about the brand that you're reviewing or writing an article about. Um, so I mean, I can understand their business relationships. Hodinky's not going to be too keen, to discuss this matter. So, but we'll see what happens when the next time they write an article about the history of dive watches or the firsts in horological history. I've wrote them emails. Nobody ever bothered to respond to me, but that's okay, gentlemen.
You're not even getting any response.
And it's not just that. It's higher end people than even that. Like Christie's Auction House in New York.
Oh yeah.
They wrote an
It's
article
terrible.
about the history of waterproof watch technology back in 2015. It is on their webpage still as of this morning. And in this article, a Christie's employee is quoted as saying, but without question, Rolex created the world's first waterproof watch from which all other watches are descendants.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that really angered me because by the time I read that article, I had already known for myself that was just an untrue statement. They're propping up a brand by saying that, which I find a little bit odd because I contacted not one, not two, but three people in Christie's watch department, including the head of the department, writing them a very polite letter saying that, listen, this is not how horological history actually happened. And I think that it's pretty bad on your behalf to, say something like, but without question. You're leaving no room whatsoever for further research,
Yeah.
for further facts to be discovered. You're just, I don't know if it's them saying this or if they've just been indoctrinated from the Rolex webpage where they went.
It's probably both. Yeah.
This story needs to be corrected. There's no stopping it now. The cat is out of the bag. I'm sorry that I ruined your 26, but this is if we're not going to be honest in what we talk about in these matters, then what in the hell are we doing here, guys?
Yeah, that's why I wanted so much to do a stream with you, and I wanted to spread the news, not the news, like spread the true information. Unfortunately, my channel is small, but yeah, guys.
I'm glad to be here today.
Yeah, guys, get Stan's book and please spread this information.
Yeah, I mean every one of the documents that I have mentioned, and then some, is in my latest book. They are all there in black and white. I mean, and the others that have already read this and given me peer review, professional review, their jaws hit the floor when they read these documents. There is just no way possible to put a spin on this and for Rolex to explain them away. It simply cannot be done, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Stan, and we will keep spreading the true information. Do you want me to put at the end of this video? Do you want me to put a link to your YouTube channel or to your website?
Yeah, to my website would be great. It's LRF Antique Watches.
Okay, guys. Yeah. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening to this fascinating story about Depollier, the world's first waterproof watch. If you are watching this on my channel, then click one of the corners and you will be redirected to Stan's website. Read it, get his book. learn more about trench watches. Maybe we'll do another one on trench watches.
Oh, that sounds great. I'm in.
If you guys are watching this on Stan's channel, click on the other thing. Hopefully Stan will put link on my website. No, not
Yep,
website,
sure
the YouTube
will.
channel. And check out my channel about vintage watches. And Stan, thank you. Thank you so much. This was fascinating. Thank you
Yep,
for
thank you for having me. I had a good time.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.